Gracious. Well, hey, we're right at that top. Is everybody, are you just so energized at 3:50 this afternoon? Yes. Brittany, how many sessions did you teach today?
I think this is session 2 or 3.
I'm I'm 3 or 4, somewhere along. I don't know. It's been a long day, but we're gonna try to make this as interactive as possible. So, my name's Jen, and this is my wonderful colleague. And we are here from Essential Education. And although we are a software company that works in curriculum development, we really take I won't say pride because it's more of a we do take a lot of passion and blessing, if you want to lean into that term, in being your partners. And the information that I get to present out and about from a professional development standpoint is only possible because we have reached out to adult educators just like you. The resources that we will share today come from the last 2 series of professional learning communities that we've cultivated. In 2023, we met with a group of about 50 educators over the course of 12 to 18 months to put together a retention resource that if you don't have, feel free to stop by our booth and we'll grab that for you. And then over about 6 months in 2024, we jumped into the content partial of the content that we're going to cover today, where we're talking about overcoming adult learning challenges. And we just wanted it to be really simple. So we took on things like trauma and learning differences and skill development and literacy. So, just really easy things to digest and jump into. So we're going to give, as the ladies and I were talking before we started, this is going to be kind of a higher level session because we do only have an hour, but we do encourage you to jump into some of those resources. And yeah, so we'll get started. All right, so as we are talking about literacy, if we're just talking about, and I hate being behind this thing, but this is where I'm gonna have to be. As we talk about literacy, if we're doing a strict Webster's, this is, this is the ability to read and write. That reading and writing component kind of goes together. I think largely we camp out in that reading section, but very rarely do you hear, right? Reading and writing. When you take the GED, you're taking the reading and writing, or ELA and reading and writing. And it is a continuum of learning. Even at our ages, whether we started with a second language or whether we're native speakers, no matter where we are all on that continuum of continuing to develop literacy skills. Our vocabulary grows every year. Some of the common terminology grows every year. I still remember the day that I was on the treadmill and I looked up at the CNN crawler and it said, "Bootylicious has now been added to Webster's dictionary." And I thought, well, praise the Lord, we really needed bootylicious to be added to the Webster's dictionary. So we're getting words that are constantly added to our vocabulary that then shift that continuum of learning. Knowledge of a skill or subject, we can think about that as far as literacy, because think about the other things that now in our society have literacy behind them. What do we know that we talk about all the time that we'll talk a little bit about here? Digital literacy, media literacy, finding truth in media literacy. So that idea of literacy has kind of become, again, just this larger version of a knowledge of a skill or a subject. And it is always developing. That's that hope for ourselves, and that's that hope for our students as well. We know that literacy is powerful. One of the things that we try to do in the PLC is kind of divide things into 3 to 4 different categories. And the first thing we do is we go out and we do research. So we're going to share some of that research, that scary literacy research today. We are in a literacy crisis in the United States, and we're going to talk through some of that today. We work through some of that research. We also don't want to shy away from what the barriers are. We think that that's really important. Not everything can just very few things actually you can just put a happy face sticker on and move on. So we need to sit in that reality of those things. We need to sit in, okay, this is the problem, these are the barriers, before then we can say, okay, what's the next step? And all of those things need to come together, right? Because unless we have a full context of the issue, we're not going to have responsive, not reactive, and there's a difference there. We're not going to have responsive policies, responsive interventions if we don't understand the full scope of the problem. And then opposite, we can have a larger scope of the problem and just say, okay, well, we talked about the problem and now we're not going to do anything about it. So it's really, really important. One of the goals that we have with any professional development, we'll ask you at the end, is there one thing that you can take away today that you can implement? So we'll talk through those things as well. So I'm going to go through a short list, but I want you to think about the things that you already see that are not on this list, where literacy is very, very powerful and is that kind of catalyst. Literacy improves job options. We know that, right? Certain bottom level reading level that employers are looking for. If you aren't making that cut, doesn't matter how skilled a professional you are in some ways, that's a weed out type skill there. Literacy reduces poverty. Generational poverty and generational low literacy rates go hand in hand. One trickles down to another, trickles down to another, trickles down to another. It is almost, it feels unsurmountable to think if you are a third generation child of a grandparent that had low literacy levels and a parent that had low literacy levels, you are way, not even at the bottom of the mountain, you're in a hole at the bottom of the mountain before you even get started as far as what your experience is around literacy and your exposure to those types of things. We know that literacy enhances the quality of life. There's actually a lot of studies that show when I heard myself in stereo. There's actually a lot of studies that show when you've heard when you're a reader, you're a leader, all those types of things. And it's because different areas of your brain open up as your vocabulary develops up, as your literacy level improves, as you have fluency and comprehension, as you build that baseline of background knowledge. We'll talk about that today. All of those things wake up and open up different sections of your brain. It's why I always tell students that are developing a second language, if they can develop in both of those things, that's their superpower, because we've actually looked at the neuroscience behind someone who is bilingual. They have parts of their brain that are awake that are not woken up for someone that speaks one language. And it's because those things are so in tune together. There's actually additional studies that your eye development, what you're doing long term with your retinas is affected by your ability, by your literacy levels. Folks with lower literacy levels are not having the same longevity in some of their retinal functions because they aren't using that mental tracking. And so it's really fascinating when you kind of boil those things down. Strengthens physical health, kind of goes into that reading for enjoyment, kind of moving out of that space, getting out of your world. I like to read a lot of fantasy because sometimes you just want to check out. So if you want to talk about dragons and all those things, we can do that later. So reducing or strengthening your physical health. Anybody in corrections? Okay, we always have some corrections, folks. Reduces recidivism. It's a known factor. We'll look at some pretty alarming statistics about how incarceration and low literacy rates go together today. Promotes generational impact. If you start to be that generation that makes that change, then you are able to turn the tide in that. But with that, you are going to need to be surrounded by a supportive community, and you're going to need to be surrounded by tools and resources. Anything else that you can think, oh, Jen, that needs to go on the list, or Brittany, if you have anything else that you would say goes on that list.
I will say for me, especially looking at this list and something that we talked about, and I heard you even going through it. This last one really resonates with me. I'll tell you why. I come from a family that I was the first college graduate. I come from a family where my great grandparents could not read. So for me to be here in front of you is because my grandparents decided to pick up a book, learn to read, and here I stand in front of you today because we were able to make this generational impact. All because just one, my grandmother actually decided to pick up a book and learn to read.
So then, tell a little bit about then your parents and how that gap was bridged there a little bit.
So one of the first things that it did, literacy was directly tied to education in our household then. Because for my great grandparents especially, the reason they were not literate was because they had to work. From a very young age, my grandmother especially, she was one of 13, on one side, my grandma on the other side was one of 11. Even though both my parents are one of 4 or more, all of them were born to work on the farm. That was their goal. They were not born to be successful or to exceed or to move forward or to go get credentials, industry recognized credentials, and go on to make life-sustaining wages. They were made to be farmers. So my grandmother made that decision suddenly, where she was just passing by things that kind of existed, she started living and reading. Oh, wait, they sell that there? This store has that? This church is this kind of church? And I've never realized this. And so she started to place that emphasis on education. Therefore, my father, who was actually one of the first to graduate high school, graduated high school, unlike his siblings ahead of him, who had all just dropped out, some of which had never gotten their GED. My mother, of course, now she's an educator. That's where I get it from. She's she's in education because of the emphasis placed on literacy and how that literacy funneled into education and then spurred what you see standing in front of you today.
And I think that's and I think that that's an interesting thing because it is that building block. You know, I think a lot of times when we're talking, especially if we're in an HSE environment, we think, okay, that first check mark is a high school equivalency credential. There are so many folks, and it breaks Brittany and I's heart when we share stories. There's so many folks, they go to their local center, they go to their local adult learning center, and they are turned away because they don't have the facilities if they are not reading at a certain level to even enter those entry-level programs. And so that was one of the things we found with the PLC, but I know you've experienced that as well. So access is something that we talk a lot about. And I think there's 3 A's that go together. So it's access, it's availability, and then it's awareness. Especially because think about this, even if your community has some great services available and they pop up a flyer somewhere, if you don't have the ability to read that flyer, you are not granted access to that information. So it's taking people to stand in the gap and fill that gap. Anything else that y'all would add to this list? Yes.
I know that it sort of goes along with quality of life, but it actually has been proven that especially if you speak another language or if you're literate, that you are less likely to develop dementia or Alzheimer's because of those neural pathways are being opened up.
Maybe that's what we need to do. We need to go learn a new language. Those hormone pathways are going down a little bit for Jen. Oh, maybe we need to go do that. What else? Who else would add something to this list? Yeah.
Reduces crime.
With that recidivism, definitely that connection in there. The statistics there are staggering, especially in the juvenile system. You're talking about, I think the last numbers we looked at, 70 to 71% of juveniles in the incarcerated system are not reading at a 3rd and 4th grade level, and that's an issue. That's an issue. All right, so let's then now talk about some scary numbers. So just threw out a scary number there. 43 million US adults possess low literacy skills. Now, when you talk about what that looks like, we quote some statistics, and there's some more in-depth specifics in the guides that I believe you all have. Did AJ pass those out, or do we still have those up here? Okay, gotcha. We quote a lot from just Department of Education, but also the Program for International Assessment of Adult Competencies. Say that 10 times fast. And then that's even a long acronym. So that's where some of these numbers come from. Also, Pew Research is also a really good source to check some of these things out. It's kind of a national clearinghouse of things, but the numbers are staggering. And so we see these big numbers, and often we stop there. And we are big proponents of asking why, and then asking why again, and then asking why again. The analogy I always use is, in science for a really long time, we thought the atom was like the smallest thing ever, and then somebody poked at it and a whole bunch of other stuff came out of it. So we've got to keep poking at things. And so one of the things that the PLC did was they said, okay, well, where are the sources of these literacy disconnects? What are some of those gaps that are coming there? And so this will link you, and we'll put the presentation in that Whova app at some point. This will link you to a great article about the root causes and give you more of a dissertation of sorts on some of these things. But one of the big literacy barriers is a stigma. We already have, and this is one of those double layer things, right? Because you already have folks in your adult education programs who don't want to admit to anyone that they haven't finished high school. So then if you drill that down even more, and they realize that, okay, maybe they made it into the class, but they don't understand any of the material. Having the strength and the courage and the risk to say, I can't read this, that's an even bigger step than out of that comfort zone. So the stigma attached to that is really large. And then access, availability, and awareness. Having access to sources, we know that there's a disparity in that. We're not going to sugarcoat that and tell you that it's not different in certain communities and in certain populations and in certain cultures and urban versus rural. There's no reason in pretending that that doesn't exist because access is an issue there. Then availability. So even if the sources exist, having availability to those sources, and then awareness, we spoke about that a little bit. And then learning differences. This complicates things even more because you may have the student that K-12 just said, well, I just can't read. And then they were never given any kind of evaluation. We're never given any kind of explanation as to maybe why some of those letters swim on the page. They were never given any kind of explanation as why is your inclination to start at the bottom and then read back up at the top? Like, where is that coming from? Those types of things. And so those learning differences then impact literacy, and it's a trickle down from there. And then, of course, one of the big things that came out of the PLC, especially with those that were a part of the group that teach primarily in an ESL and an ESOL environment, is they aren't convinced that the students that come to them with a native language have strong literacy skills in their native language. And then you have that conundrum then of trying to learn a new language and develop those crossover literacy skills. And I know that's a part that you're really passionate about too.
So one of the things of when I started off, and some of you might be familiar with this, when I started off in an adult ed classroom, they somehow discovered that I had this smile and personality. And they're like, oh, you got it. Here's a stapler and empty folder. Good luck. Right? That's how the word right? And very shortly after, they're like, you did so well at GET. Here's ESOL too. Okay, I don't even know what that stands for.
So you were trying like not to be good at things because you weren't going to get, one more responsibility. Yeah.
And that was one of the first things I noticed. So they were giving me, unlike the empty folder and stapler, they were giving me, oh, here's this ESL curriculum. Here's this ELA's English Language Acquisition curriculum. Here you are. I'm like, great, I have this to start. I'm pulling up different, I don't have me say any other providers in here, but I'm pulling up different curriculums on the screen. I'm pulling out their books. I'm excited. And the students are looking at it and then looking at me, looking at it and then looking at me. And I'm like, yeah. And then finally, one grade or so, no, what just, I'll never forget this student. This? No puedo leer. Right? And I was like, it couldn't read it. And I was like, oh, it's in Spanish. How naive of me, right? How naive of me, how assumptive teaching of me. It's in Spanish. And he looked at me again with all the sincerity he could muster and said, Miss, no puedo leer. I cannot read. And so we discovered that time and time again that barrier exists across cultures. So if they couldn't read in their native language, trying to teach them vowels, and even getting back at utterances, I'm trying to get them forward into the actual true literacy learning. It was absolutely one of the barriers that we face, especially with classrooms where we're trying to serve their students and they're learning too, right?
And I think that's where, and I know you can chime in here too, where that conundrum is with some programs, and I'd love to hear how y'all handle some of this. Some programs that they require students to go through a full ESL program before they can attempt anything with a high school equivalency. And then others that say, okay, we just want to get you to this point, take the high school equivalency, and then go back into that. Do you have any experiences with either of those things and how they play themselves out?
Absolutely. I want to pause and make sure that, is there anyone in here first that wants to share with that experience? Because I don't want to skip, please.
So in Kansas, if a student starts within a program year as an ESL student, we are not allowed to give the TABE class E and then TABE 11, 12. Yeah, it's a little short. Sorry. Within the same school year. So if they start as an ESL student in August and didn't actually need a whole lot of program there, and then maybe by December they could go survive in that GED classroom, we can't fully and officially transition them to the ABE classroom until the next July. But sometimes they'll come participate.
They're going to audit your class. Yeah, I'm just going to sit in the back for a little bit. Yeah.
And also, a lot of those students, there's this idea that it's the other side of the
Mm.
And so my
Mhm.
colleague that is a teacher on the other side of the hall, hey, here's Jess, you're gonna hang out with her now. And
Mhm.
so we also kind of market that to the student as some of the transition. You're not gonna spend the whole morning in your class.
Mhm.
You're gonna spend this chunk, and then you'll come back over here where it's safe
Mhm.
and try to lower the anxiety for
Mhm.
those students.
And I love that even from a colleague to colleague relationship. If you built a relationship with that student over that longer period of time and then kind of passing that baton and helping that student then feel safe in the environment that they'll transition to, I love that from a cultural standpoint is really great. Yeah.
And in our program, one of the things that we've had to do, because we've done both models, and I'm working in Central Virginia where I'm from, and I will say this, what we understood from both models is that in this ESOL population, we actually had such a unique, I'll say, source of motivation
Mm.
with those learners, right? All of our adult ed learners, they all have this really great source of intrinsic motivation, but especially those English language learners, when they came in with that motivation of, I'm going to do this, I'm going to stick it out. In my culture, we sit down and memorize the textbook, and I can't even read. And they're wanting to do these types of things that we found a lot of the times when we were addressing those barriers and allowing them to transition when they're ready and not when our state tells us to. You didn't hear that from me. What we did is we did
If you're online, don't send that
if you're
recording
working,
out.
don't
Yeah.
tell me.
Yeah, and I think again, so because I kind of live in the cultural realm of things where I constantly am going back to the things that anchor that retention and keep that student motivated. So to me, as an adult learner, and what we know about adult learners is they don't want to waste their time and they want to see that it matters. So if you see that room across the hall and they, despite that intimidation factor, I can't get there for another X amount of time, that's going to kill that motivation. I mean, it's why, think about what in COVID, I still think it's crazy that all of a sudden GED and HiSET never had an online option, but they needed to all of a sudden come up with a solution because of that fact. And I was told by some of their leaders that one of the motivating facts was that they had all these folks that were ready to test. Lockdown happens, and if you don't open anything up until, you're going to lose that population of folks. Either, it's that whole, like, if you're in K-12, what you lose during the summer, like those kind of things can happen, but at minimum, it's a motivational loss in that. But one of the things that Brittany just touched on and that you touched on as well is when we talk about culture and we talk about the value of those peer relationships and encouraging each other, those of you that are in ESL and ESOL environments, take joy in what you can capitalize on there, because we've had folks that were part of these PLCs that were able to share some of the things that are unique to their culture and the unique to the tight-knit nature of their communities that can then be transferred over to some other folks as well. So, all right, so let's move on from these barriers. The PLC focused areas of improvement. Improving adult literacy skills represents both a pressing need and an unprecedented opportunity. When you look through all these statistics, when you see all these things, it can be really daunting and it can feel really heavy, but with every open opportunity, it's just that. There is an open opportunity. With every open gap, there's the opportunity to fill that. And so our PLC camped out in these three areas: awareness and accessibility, professional development, and instructional support. So we're going to unpack some of those right now. Awareness and accessibility. So these are resources that, again, we'll put this out on the Whova app that we want to put in your hands that do different things in different ways. So the National Action Plan for Adult Literacy, it's a great way just to kind of look at an overview of a combination between policy and instruction and where we're going on some of those things. Community engaged research initiatives, those are really great things to look at, just different examples of different community initiatives that happened in different places. And what I like about some of the resources there is they give their contact information and are willing for you to reach out to them and say, hey, this worked in your community, what would that look like in mine? A pro-literacy partner, go-to source for us, not only as a national clearinghouse for data and statistics, but a national clearinghouse for people that are always pushing the envelope, pushing the advocacy. They're right there with COABE at Washington every year saying, hey, we got to do something about this. And then a national literacy directory. I love this because one of the things we talked about it in trauma-informed instruction, I know Brittany's talked about it in differentiated instruction. Sometimes you need to outsource things, and we don't have an awareness of what those things are. We told several administrators, hey, if you're looking to really, really resource your teachers with some things, put the tools, put the referrals in their hands, create a resource guide so that when student comes with fill in the blank, they've got a remote path that they can start to follow. So the National Literacy Director, when you click into it, it'll give you resources by state. So these are kind of some take-home things that we'll want to send you off with, because they really are something that you'll need to dig in and spend some time with. So we want to make sure that you have this in that arena of awareness and accessibility. Brittany, anything you wanted to say here about addition to anybody else? You've got a really great resource that you want to share. Hey, I found XYZ. Yeah.
The Barbara Bush Foundation.
Right, yeah, we'll link you to that later. We'll mention that. Is anybody familiar with that resource? It goes over kind of an idea of an overscope of a plan. Some of it you're gonna say, that sounds wonderful. It would also be nice to have a rainbow pony with wings and ride it to school every day. So some of that is very high level, but hey, we gotta shoot for the moon, right? We've gotta keep pushing forward. They have excellent stats, and they are moving that needle a little bit with some of those initiatives for sure. Okay, so awareness and accessibility action steps, address barriers to access. Look at that directory of classes. What other options? Who else can you partner with in your community? Ask questions. We talk about this all the time. We have got to be a people of curiosity. We've got to cultivate that in our classrooms for lots of different ways. We've got to cultivate that in each other. Hey, you mentioned that example. Tell me more about that. Hey, you mentioned something that worked well for you. Tell me more about that. Hey, you mentioned that you put Susan in contact with somebody that was able to resource her in fill in the blank. Tell me more about that, so that you can kind of put together that personal network. We are seeing this be very, very effective in very small communities, where they, because of their small nature, they're capitalizing on, it's kind of looking at the opportunity over the challenge. They're capitalizing on the small nature of their communities. There are some places that are putting together transportation initiatives. A big barrier to access, we know, for classes in general, but then especially to literacy, is transportation options, childcare options, those types of things. So they're the things that we don't really think about, because again, we're looking at this big problem and we aren't digging down a little bit further. What's the root of that? It is not that our students don't have the desire to learn. It is not that our students don't have the motivation. They are climbing out of a pit to get to the bottom of that mountain and then start to put the steps together to climb that mountain. So just different initiatives that will be mentioned in the guide as well, different things that our PLC folks work together with other communities to do. Become an advocate, make your voice loud, make it proud. Write all the things, explore all the options, community partnerships, business partnerships, and volunteer partnerships. And I know that can seem really daunting. I mean, it can seem like a part-time job to do that. And so one of the things that the folks in our PLC over the last few years, they've identified, and this might be you. You might say, well, I work in this capacity, but I'm always saying, give me more to do. If you've got somebody in your organization that's saying, give me more to do, we found two big areas where you can really put those folks to work in very positive ways. One of them is helping them to come alongside your students that need accommodations and filling out all that paperwork and doing all the things that you need to do to get your accommodations to take a test. And the other one was in this regard. Start making those phone calls. Start going through the proverbial phone book and finding out who we can partner with. There may be people out there that you just don't know about. So that was one thing that came out. Anybody have any other ideas? You said, hey, this really worked, and we were able to create some buzz, some awareness, and greater accessibility. Any thoughts from you?
Go ahead. No,
Yeah.
I mean, one of the big problems, the two problems that our students have, one is transportation. I'm from Chicago, and a lot of our students, they come, it takes them over an hour to get there, because they have 4 hours of class, tutoring afterwards, so they're coming for 4 or 5 hours usually, but some of them don't have the money. And, you know, I contacted the transportation, the CTA in Chicago, and like, they don't partner with nonprofits to give money to people. And the other problem is really hard to find childcare. And, you know, those, it's like, it's really a big problem.
and both of those things, they have universal implications, right? Those were two of the biggest barriers when we did our retention initiative that came out of that. And so people got really creative with some things. Again, some of these things I share, I sound like, oh, that would be great if we could do that. There's a community from a PLC where they kind of did a Meals on Wheels, but it was with homework assignments and things, or they would just, hey, I'm delivering some curriculum, but if you end up in the bus on the way back to the facility, we can do that. So got really creative with some of those things. Some of the initiatives that they did in there was one PLC worker with the retention initiative that she wanted to track as a class why her students were missing class, and she made it kind of fun. They had a poster in their classroom, and they'd pop an emoji into like a grid over the course of time. And if it was childcare, there was a little baby emoji. If it was transportation, there was a little car emoji. And then as a class, they looked back at it over the course of the month, and some really, I know I can't promise this for everybody, but some really cool things came out of that awareness of that. There was a young man that said, well, wait a second, don't you work like right down the street from me, to a young man who had missed class the week before 4 times and he had little cars in there. And he said, don't you work right down the street from me? Come on, jump on in. And so those things, I say that because I can't promise that type of teamwork is going to happen, but you don't know if you don't ask, and you don't know if you don't explore it.
And I will say, especially so I live in Central Virginia, and you always hear me say Central Virginia because I'm going to tell you the city I'm from, and that's what people number one. I live in Central Virginia, and there are areas where we used to, especially for our family literacy program, we used to like, you can get a free laptop from us working through it, we'll send it home with you, blah, blah, blah. And here you go again, I love my students as they feel so empowered to speak to me and give me the real. I'm real, so give me the real. And they're like, we ain't got no Wi-Fi out there.
Yeah.
We got more clouds than we got people. There's no Wi-Fi out here. So what do you want me to do with this? Like, it's not going to actually be a resource for me. So we're like, oh, okay, I got you. We're going to partner with the library. I'm feeling myself. We're going to partner with the library. We're going to check out hotspots to you, send them home, Wi-Fi on a laptop. And they said, more than they just give me to read, there wasn't a Wi-Fi tower out there. I'm talking about, I know where the hell it is. There wasn't a Wi-Fi tower out there for that hotspot to connect to. So here yet again, G thinks. So what we had to take steps back and doing, and even in that family literacy program, we did, and I always joke about how many hats we have to wear in adulthood, right? It doesn't matter, and I even joked with my company here, they just recently changed my title. I said, it doesn't matter what the title, because I'm gonna be wearing so many different hats anyway. I'm the counselor, I'm the child care worker, sometimes I'm the transportation provider. It doesn't matter what the title says.
I like your crown the best. It's my favorite one.
So
Yeah.
what we realized in taking that back, and I almost like that emoji thing, I like that, but in doing reflective, we're like, we needed to build stronger community partnerships and get more stakeholders in our area. We had to do a lot of work, and I'm not going to skip over. We had to do a lot of work, but we wanted to do it once, where we were like, okay, who is going to donate the bus passes? Oh, we found this company that will donate bus passes as long as we make sure our students interview with them. They'll offer our students interview. Could you believe that a company is called BWXT, a nuclear plant in my city, donated 100 bus passes, and they said the only thing we want is send your students to us to interview when they donate their GPA. Talk about a community partnership.
Oh,
And we never
win-win.
had to make it in.
Yeah.
We just kept calling. Where are the bus passes? Here. Where are the bus passes? Speaking of the childcare issue, that was our biggest problem over transportation was childcare. So we thought we were being really smart. We're going to call in all these college students. They need volunteer hours anyway. They needed that early child, especially the ones in early childcare. They loved it. They hopped in. They were great. But when summer hit, guess what?
Yeah.
We lost every volunteer we had. So again, back to the drawing board, reflective in our practices. And then that's when we realized we had a former student who one of her goals was to be able to start a daycare eventually. So for her to come back in, she was volunteering to watch the kids. Yes, we put her through the whole week. We took care of it. Fingerprint, FBI fingerprint was only $10. We made sure she had a background. All of the things, we started her off as a volunteer child care services. The parents loved her because she stayed in the room. She's in the room with them because she's a former student. She loves to still hear some of the lessons and actually do it. She started telling her friends about it. Hey, have you taken this class yet? We'll take the class, and the ones that graduate, they can come help me with the kids. Other students are telling other former students, you know, I'm back with, they used to call me Miss B. I'm back with Miss B. I'm back with Miss B. I'm helping her with this. And our former students were coming in by the masses and going, I remember them and that was me. And if I can be of service to you, you pay for my fingerprint, I'll gladly watch these kids for 3 hours, 3 times a week. I didn't want to skip over your
Oh,
story.
you're good. So I just want to talk about our college. We're doing two different things that really help get that community partnership. So the first thing we have is they're called empowered coordinators. And so they're specifically, so when we have students fill out the interest form online or in person, those empowered coordinators meet with them before they even do any kind of assessments. And they talk about those barriers. They talk about what goals the students have. And so that way, if it is like that transportation barrier, they can get them access to those bus tickets. They can get them to class and figure out how to get them to class and wherever they are. And then our college as a whole is doing roundtables every month with the local businesses in Mason City. So that way they can talk about each business does a presentation every month. It's about 2 or 3 a month. And so that way all of the leaders in the towns surrounding Mason City as well are able to hear, okay, how does this connect with Old Ed? What do they do that maybe we didn't know before?
I love that. And I'll say that, which I love this particular slide of what you put up here, because it reminds me of that quote that we always get when we start teaching. They don't care how much you know until they know
How much you care. Yeah.
And that's what this is. You're absolutely not shying away from, we are addressing that there are barriers, and I'm here to help you. I've got just as much skin in this game as you do to really be there and support you. I love very well.
I do, and employers, when they are presented the information, they will have the incentive to do it. And some of them in certain areas, especially our trade community, they are going to be hungry for workers. They are going to be hungry for people that come in with power skills that then they can go and they can utilize and build those skills up. I heard folks that cover generational research. They said when we look back at this point in history, it is going to seem like we had 100,000 or 500,000 baby boomers retire overnight, and we didn't have anybody to fill that gap. Gen Z can be that gap because those students that fall into that category right now, they're 13 to 27, 28. They are a generation that doesn't follow the status quo. They are a generation that doesn't conform to normal views of success, and that's a good thing. We've got to get it out of our heads that the only way to be successful is to get that 4-year college degree, because it is just not true. And that is a wonderful, wonderful superpower, empowering thing for our students, especially so if you've got those partnerships. That's why I'm like, well, gosh, if the interview is the only thing they're asking for, then that's a win-win for those folks. And so the employers are going to be, I think, more acquiescent than what we think sometimes, especially because of the time that we're in right now and the shift that we're seeing there. All right, let's keep going. So improving adult literacy, looking at professional development is what we're doing right now. It's having the conversation, it's sharing resources, it's giving ideas, it's saying, hey, that worked for you, let me think about how that might work for me. Hey, that didn't work for you, could that still work for me? That's the wonderful thing when we get our professional learning communities together. So, but one of the things that came out is, hey, we need evidence-based training material. If you want to talk about the science of reading, we need to have resources in our hands to teach the science of reading. And if you've gotten one email in your inbox over the last 6 months that says science of reading, you've probably gotten 50 emails in your inbox that says science of reading. And it is because we are in this literacy crisis. I have a friend, Brittany, I don't think I told you the story. I have a friend that just finished her PhD in cultural anthropology. And she's teaching at a college that's right outside of our town. And they brought in the entire staff. So you've got anybody from cultural anthropologists to physicists to mathematicians to, yes, folks that are in education. And they said, we're giving you 5 weeks to submit how you're going to be teaching science of reading in your classes. Whether you're a physicist, whether you're a cultural anthropologist, whether you're teaching archaeology, how are you going to be teaching the science of reading? Because they are finding that their college students are not reading at a level where they can be successful. We are in a literacy crisis. And it's these things, it's bringing that awareness. I mean, what I was thinking when Brittany was saying, we think we know the answer. Let's give them all computers. But and then explaining that. I mean, I'd still tear up every time there's the commercial, a little boy that has to go to the laundromat to do his homework. And there's so many people that just don't know. It's not that they don't care, they just don't know. They just don't know. Nationwide credentialing for adult literacy instructors. This is what you will see both in this National Action Plan for Adult Literacy and through the Barbara Bush Foundation materials. This, to me, if you're looking through it, it's a blessing, and it gives me some concern, because in some ways when you read it, it seems like something that's going to be required in a professional development sense, and we know what that can look like. Sometimes we know what the teacher turnover rate already looks like. We know that we want to get better, but we also know when it's taken over and it's standardized, a lot of times that's taken out of our hands in the way that we can get better, in the way that we can excel. So that was just one of the things, that food for thought to consider. Professional development action steps. Teachers are begging for intentional training. If you are an administrator, if you run PD, if you have any kind of voice in PD, intentional training, that individualized, hey, this is what this can look like in your classroom. And that's one of the things that I love about the Overcoming Learning Differences or Learning Challenges guide, is the PLC folks shared what that intentional training can look like. So I really encourage you to dive in to some of those really, really practical interventions that they use there. Targeted educator development, those things going hand in hand. Leveled programmatic structure, this was huge. So we have an educator that she is in an evolving role. She's kind of coming out of the instructional classroom into administration, and she kind of has this thing, and I always kind of had the same hope. When I was teaching K-12, I always said, I hope I never forget what it's like to be a parent. And then as I moved into administration, I said, I hope I never forget what it's like to be a teacher. And she's maintaining that. And so she's carrying that into her administrative role, and she's saying, we cannot be all things to all people. We can differentiate all dang dong diggity day, and we can continue to get better in that. But when we have got a huge stratification of literacy levels alone, not to mention all of these other factors, so they are starting a very structured level program, leveling program. And what I like about it in teaching under a similar program at the K-12 level is you're not stuck. You know, you mentioned that idea of being stuck, because it might be you put student A in a leveled program, and in 3 weeks, that's all they needed, and they're ready to go up. Whereas somebody else that might be at the same level, they don't progress at the same level. So what they are doing with that is they are constantly assessing through that program, and they're allowing that cycle up. It's a challenge for the teachers because there is a lot of movement, but one thing that they do is then they know that they are going to be in that village kind of structure, and so they make sure that I don't just know my class, I know your class, and I know your class, and I know your class, and they're doing some really, really inventive things with that culture element. And then science of reading, we're seeing it everywhere. Brittany, you could talk a lot more about mind play than I can, and some of the things we're seeing there.
So we actually have, we redesigned, it's developed originally for younger learners, but we actually redesigned for adult ed learners, Mind Play Studio Ultra. And what that is, doesn't matter really what the title is, you know, I say that all the
I
time.
know.
Let me tell you
It
what
was ultra, it was shabam, it was like all kinds of stuff.
But what it is if you have a licensed paid speech therapist on your campus, this isn't for you. That's never happened in my career.
I was gonna say, who's got one of those? Yeah.
If you don't, this program is for you. It starts at a pre-K level. It starts at a pre-literacy level. Instead of starting at kindergarten, it's actually at 0. This program starts with utterances. Silly words. Oh yeah. Who knows how to teach a diphthong? I have my degree. I taught I worked as a linguistics and really so I had to learn how to teach a diphthong. I had to learn how to teach mouth placement and tongue placement. Guess what? Majority of educators should not have to, do not have to. Mind Play does that for you. What I really love about it is it's self-paced. It does not require any teacher intervention. This is for your students who cannot read. It puts them in there. It doesn't matter if their native language is not English, because as I just mentioned, it starts with utterances, sounds, silly made-up words, so that they can start learning, oh, this is what it sounds like when you put a VR together. One of the toughest challenges I had in living in Spanish-speaking countries is there's not really too many words with a VR together. So me name,
Yeah.
right? It's coming out different ways every time.
You get an R roll with it, don't you?
I just switched it. I was like, listen, just call me Nicole. It's easy, Nicole. So, it's one of those things that if you don't have a literacy coach on your campus, and you don't necessarily have a licensed speech pathologist, then MindPlay absolutely fills that gap for you. It is a set it and forget type of program because your students will immediately see the first thing it does, it takes them to this universal screener. It's screening them for their phonics and all of those things, and their literacy and their fluency, comprehension. As they move forward, the system automatically starts giving them the lessons they need, and you as a teacher will immediately be able to see, are they at critical reading levels, which is anything below sixth grade? Are they approaching their reading level anyway towards that sixth through 10th grade? And then it is designed to get your readers on a 12th grade reading level. And you'll be able to see when they're meeting that reading level, which means they've made it through that 12th grade reading level, and then it's all done through the system. Having that, and I will say, unlike our, which I love our avatars, I love Leonard, I love Maria, but inside of MindPlay is a real person, showing a real face, a real mouth, and turning to the side and even saying, say, say. So that when they see that word, say, they know how to read it, they know how it sounds, they know what it looks like. Very powerful tool. It's something that inside of your book, I'm about to hand you towards the end, there's a catalog in there. I'll go ahead and bookmark it to that MindPlay page so you can see more about it on your own.
You said that MindPlay is designed to get them up through the 12th grade level, so fluency, vocabulary, comprehension.
These are all the things behind, yeah. So I just moved to that screen, to this slide. So these are, sometimes the verbiage is interchangeable. This is the pattern for the science of reading. This is the pattern for MindPlay.
And although it may be gold is to 12th grade, and actually there's content in there that's considered 12 plus, 13, we call it 12th grade, because that is actually so that your students can go to post-secondary education after with MindPlay.
Is it an app?
That's the beauty of it. No, and I know people like to like that, but it's online. It's an online learning platform, and the reason it's not an app. I don't know about you, but I've had to look a student in the face and say, "You ain't got any space. What you gonna read the Bible?" If they don't have Google apps on their phone, there's no more. You're doing a tough decision. With ours, there's no downloading of an app. It has Wi-Fi. They can log on and start learning. I've had students using their kids' tablets on public transportation, learning while they're taking their kids to school.
What about when they can't? We teach digital literacy. We're starting at 0, starting on the computer, using the mouse. I've tried some programs online, but if you can't read the instructions, you don't know what to do. So are the instructions, do you have to read them, or are they spoken?
They're spoken, yeah.
I want you to work on our last session too, because I talked about digital literacy. I'm not going to steal Jen's session.
Well, no, we got a whole second half, but we're not gonna get to that, I can tell you right now. Unless y'all wanna stay till 6:30 tonight. I know you're really excited about that.
We even have a dial digital list implementation, but what I love about even our digital literacy component, when students sign into our computers, essentially it starts with all software. This is a mouse, this is a keyboard, this is how to type. But what's great, we have screen reader technology. So if they cannot read, the screen will actually be read aloud to them.
The closed captioning, the transcript downloads, those types of things. And another point, and I kind of lean into the emotional side of this sometimes in juxtaposed to the academic, is with MindPlay, it's a single sign-in through if you're already working with essential education. So if you've got students that are all working in the room, hey, we're all gonna work on essential education. If Brittany's at a much lower literacy level than I am, we're all working on the same thing. Unless I'm a nosy Nelly and I'm like, oh, what are you looking at over there, which is possible. But it takes away a little bit of that stigma because we're all working on the same thing, but they can work at their own individualized level. And it does cover these elements. The only one I would add, and this is kind of my soapbox moment, but it's kind of the beauty, is if it's that plug and play where you can get that individualized instruction. There's a lot of research right now that's saying we always default to these things when we're talking about reading development, and there's an outside component in the form of background knowledge that we cannot ignore. There's a lot of really good studies that are out. One of them, gosh, we presented so much, I don't know what I've said when at this point. So if you heard this story already, I'm sorry. So there was a research study. They brought some individuals in. The first thing they did was they tested their reading ability. So same like a Lexile type a test. So they kind of judged it low, medium, progressing, those types of things. And then they sent them out and they came back and then they gave them a second assessment. But that assessment was about their knowledge of baseball. Anything from the name of the game to how it's played to different teams, all of these sorts of things. And then they sent them out and then they brought them back and they did a reading comprehension test. Guess what the passage was about? Baseball. What they found is that even high-level students that had high-level reading, if they had a very low knowledge of baseball, did not perform very well. And then the opposite was true. Some of the lower level readers, if they had a corresponding high level knowledge of baseball, they outperformed those higher readers. And what it is showing is a lot of different things. I think it definitely illuminates the confidence factor. If you are reading something and it is about a subject that you do not know, you've got another anxiety layer that's popping onto that. And you're saying, oh my goodness, that's about astrophysics. And I don't know anything about astrophysics, but then you come up about, oh, that's one's about quilting and you're an expert quilter. Then you're going to say, well, hot dog, I know all about quilting. And you're going to go into that with a different mindset. They are using it a little bit, and Brittany and I could definitely talk about this at other times. They're using it they're trying to go to standardized testers and say, you need to see some of this information. And one of the standardized testers, we won't say which one it is, said, well, we don't have any passages about baseball. You're missing the point. If it's not baseball, it could be XYZ, it could be fill in the blank. And so that's difficult because we know that our students need both. They need exposure to lots of different topics, but they also need these fundamental skills. So if you've got a system that's working on these fundamental skills, and it kind of gives you the idea to kind of jump into your craft, it gives you more space to explore some greater level topics. And really, for the GED and the high set, they're assessed on those skills. So you can explore a whole wide range of topics that I can't guarantee you are going to be or not going to be on the exam, but as you're broadening that perspective, you're also broadening vocabulary, and it's just a win-win for everybody. We are never going to get through all this today, but that's okay. Yes.
So for me, the starting goal especially, because I'm talking here, in my mind, I'm only giving my play to my students that are identifying as below their literacy level. So for those students, it was really important for me to hit our strike our iron is hot, if that makes sense. So I was requiring a minimum of 10 hours. However, a week. However,
in your classroom or at home.
So for my students, because I knew we had a limited amount of time together, some of that 10-hour commitment was on their own.
And can you track it?
Oh, absolutely. Same way that they can get on it from anything you can track it from, and I kid you not, I have kind of, again, I'm from somewhere in Central Virginia. It is not that uncommon for me to be in the grocery store and one of my students to run into me and we're chit-chatting and I pull out my phone and go, wait a minute. I don't see no hours for the last week.
Yeah.
Why are you out here scanning boxes? Go ahead and call me. But it's something that is, I would recommend just a minimum of 10 hours just to do it. You will find though, with mind play unique, and I won't even say this because we're here at one. Not even the situation, but especially with mind play, I found that because they are getting those immediate dopamine boosts of, yeah, and we're going. They want more than
Yeah.
I even in and go, okay, what else? Now that I've got this, what else? Because they actually do enjoy it. And because, I mean, as we talked about bringing in literacy and how it's changing their lives, that is one course that I've seen most learners. I started at 10 and you look back and they're doing 20, 25.
That's good. And are they making progress?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, leaps and bounds. And I think along with that motivation, we do see a good balance of those that are using it at home, because think about it, if you're trying to emulate a mouth movement with somebody, that's not something necessarily I want to do whole group. but there's a lot of value. And we talk to learners all the time. A lot of people think that auditory learners need to hear somebody else say it. 90% of the time, auditory learners need to hear themselves say it. And so creating a space where they can do that at home is really important, because then there's no stigma, there's no audience, there's no anything for that as well. Alrighty, so instructional support action steps. One big thing, pre-teach vocabulary. Lots of different reasons why to do that. One of the things that we're finding is going back old school dictionary style when you're pre-teaching that vocabulary, breaking it out by syllables. What does it look like? What does it sound like? What other root words can we have from this? That's helpful for everybody, and it's still hitting some of those pre-literacy objectives, and it's building that confidence level. That's a predictive teaching element. If you know that you're teaching something that's more difficult and you're going to come across vocabulary words that day, then you know we're going to be a trigger for some students that are going to shut down when they see that higher level vocabulary. Pre-teach it. Take it out of the equation, and then teach them how to do that when they're taking a test. Find those words that you don't know. Now go back and look at the root like we talked about, and just equipping with those skills. Use text format. I love this because it's a great test taking skill, but it's also a great literacy and decoding skill, not necessarily in the decoding sense that we often think about when we think about reading decoding. There's a lot of information, especially in standardized testing, that you can get, information you can draw out from the title. If it's broken up into subtitles, that's already chunked for you to go back in that chunking standpoint. If words are highlighted, if they're italicized, if they're underlining, teaching students to look for those clues as they're going along, because a publisher doesn't do that, a test maker doesn't do that unless they're saying, hey, this is important. I always point that out to students that say, hate taking those tests, all those test makers are trying to trick me. They're not necessarily trying to trick you, but they are trying to make you think. And if you know where to look, they're actually trying to help you along the way sometimes. And as a side note, if you have students that are skipping the directions on any of their standardized testing, or if they're skipping any of the passage introductions, make that a very direct thing that you're teaching your students to do, because we have often seen answers to questions in the title itself, definitely in the description leading into that passage. So it's those types of things, those clues that students can look for. Leverage those peer connections. Again, building that one-on-one, that understanding. You can get really creative. There's a lot of great ideas in the guide. Sometimes it is pairing up a higher level student with a lower level student. And sometimes it's just pairing up a student that's just a little bit beyond that student. There's a big empowering thing. It's one thing to know something, but it's really challenging to teach it after that. And so if you've got a student that can come alongside another student, then that's a win-win. They're helping that student, they're building that camaraderie, but then they're saying it out loud again, and it's solidifying what they understand there. Use interest-based passages. This is huge. This has been a game changer for a lot of folks. One of the things that we know about adult learners is that, because we're all adult learners, we want autonomy. We want things that are interesting to us. And so some teachers, and I'm sure none of you are all of them, we like to hold on to that really tightly. We like to say, but I know I have to teach these things, and this is the way I've always taught it, and I always use this passage at this point in the curriculum, and I always do these things. What would it look like to let go of that? What would it look like to say, hey, I've got to teach these skills. What do y'all want to read about? What do y'all want to learn about? And allow them to be autonomous and have ownership in that. We have folks that have shared in the PLC that just turned the tide in their entire classroom dynamic. She was teaching the history section of the GED, and she allowed them to choose whatever topic they wanted to talk about. They're talking about it in class. They're talking about it after class. They're coming back and saying, hey, I was thinking about what we were talking about yesterday. And as fun as those argumentative essays, or I like dogs better than cats, might be to us, that's not something they're going to say, hey, I was thinking about the dogs yesterday. I mean, maybe they will, but it's those types of things that we can engage. So really, really lean into those interest-based passages. And I'm going to say one thing that might be controversial. I don't know if Brittany will agree with me or not. A lot of teachers are like, ooh, scary AI, scary AI. If you have multi-level readers in your classroom, AI is your best friend, and if it's not, it should be, because you could do this on your own. If you wanted to teach, but your students want to know about political parties, if you wanted to spend up teen hours and look at different vocabulary at different reading levels, you could put together a passage for reading about political parties at a 4th grade level, at a 6th grade level, at an 8th grade level. Or you can go to an AI assistant and ask them to do the same thing, and it's done instantaneously. That is not cheating. That is not taking away from your craft. It is giving you a resource to utilize in that. So I always say when the robots rise up, they kind of deserve it because they're just kind of knocking it out of the park. So lean into some of those things. It's that working smarter, not harder kind of thing, and allowing you. The way I like to look at it is it's allowing you to do what you do so well, and that's not spend all of those hours finding those resources. Spend those hours thinking about your students. Spend those hours getting to know your students. Spend those hours thinking about those examples you're going to use with your students. Building background knowledge, we already talked about that. And then just using multisensory resources. This is something that our instructional designers really lean into. Whenever we create something, there's always a see it, hear it, read it. If you want to write it, touch it component, because we do have folks with such a wide array of learning differences, and there's a lot of information out there, a lot of statistics that say we might have a more dominant learning style in some way, shape, or form, but that might fluctuate. I know I learn a completely different way in math than I do in language arts, and so some of that changes a little bit. So it's kind of your catch-all, right? It's kind of that idea of really, and I challenge you to do this. Our 3D guide does this. Think of, if you're writing a lesson or if you're about to teach a lesson, just run a checklist. And we put little icons in there, and I like to think about the icons. So it's got an ear, it's got a volume thing, and then it's got, I think it's a hand, and it says, okay, does this lesson have an auditory component? Does this lesson have a visual component? Does this lesson have a hands-on component? Even if you don't write it down or look at that paper, just make that a checklist in your head for those multisensory resources. And then support from essential education. We have a specific PD course. To be honest, I haven't gone through this one in a long time. The reading and identifying and remediating reading skills. That's more of a paid PD option that you can look at. And so we have lots of administrators that use it, but Brittany and I give free PD, and we like giving free PD, and we like spending this time with you. And if you can get your hours and you can learn and we can all have a good time together, that's where we'd like to live. So
I think our PD courses do go to those that you need for your renewal, your teaching license. These do give you
Yes.
those teacher credits. We'll get by submitting a certificate. I'm not sure that there's any state that has rejected that.
No, they haven't. And the free Tuesdays with Essential Education that we do, you can log on. If you can't come in at that time, go ahead and sign up anyways. We were talking about that. Go ahead and sign up anyways. You'll get the recording. And when you get the recording, then it'll send you a certificate of completion as well, and you can submit that. So you'll get your hours, you'll get the information. And again, that's all free. And what Brittany was saying, this is what MindPlay looks like when it pops up. So that's that little screen and screen option. So you can see that students in the Essential Education program, but then they're getting the information that they need right when they need it. So it's that timely intervention. And what about digital literacy? We don't need digital literacy. We don't need to go into digital literacy. We don't have time to go into digital literacy, but this is a compounded issue, and we need to be aware of that, because a lot of folks are like, well, you don't have to worry about transportation. You don't have to worry about access because you can access it online. If there aren't the digital literacy components, if there isn't the access to Wi-Fi and the availability there, then it is still a problem. And so those are the things that we have to continue to be vocal about. Anything y'all want to talk about in the next 5 minutes before we go? Share ideas. You've solved all the world's literacy problems, and now you want to tell everybody about it. Brittany, anything else from you? Okay. Mm-hmm.
But I haven't ever seen the GED test. So on the GED test, are they actually like really about the passage?
I think a little bit of both. Yeah, I would say a little bit of both. I think as we were saying, well, and I think as we were saying, look for those clues, because 9 times out of 10 there are some clues in there. But I think I'm a big proponent of media literacy in general, and that is a wonderful way to talk about having our students be truth seekers and going beyond the title. Because there are many people, and it's human nature. Oh, I read this research about that. Did you really? Well, I read an article about it. Did you really? Well, I scanned it. Did you really? Well, I read the title. And so titles can be very deceptive. And so there was a young man, a young father who put that to the test. He published his TikTok and then he titled it down in the bottom what it was going to be about, and I'll tell you the title of it. And he also wrote a blog post, and it says, "Why I Don't Help My Wife Around the House." That was the title. The comment section murdering this man was ridiculous. And this was a 30-second TikTok, and this was literally, you know how a blog will say 2-minute read? Straight to the comment section. You're a jerk. Da, 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 da. Now, if you would have read, he said, "I don't help my wife around the house because this is a partnership. We are both in this. There's not me helping somebody. I can wash my own dishes. I can take my own kid to school." But most people stopped at the title, and that was honestly, while he believes in that, that was his real point in that. And then he gave some follow-up information about we have got to stop being a society that just reads the title. I wouldn't say tricky. I wouldn't say tricky.
We're just starting to discover that, especially with the GED exam, as we're seeing this new generation come along, it's no longer a test of content, it's a test of concept.
100%.
If you're able to get the skill of, I have the skill of reading comprehension, I know that I have to read beyond the title, then the content is important. The concept is what we're focusing on.
And that's why teaching test taking skills, and then from a literacy standpoint, teaching, the literacy skill behind that. So I'm trying to think of an example to give you. So I saw an example from a GED practice test where the title was a fireside chat. And it was from a presidential address from Roosevelt in the Depression. And he had these things that he wanted to make more touchy-feely than an address from the Oval Office. So he called it a fireside chat. That title doesn't give a whole lot away, unless you read the introduction to that passage. And it says, "The following is a passage from President Roosevelt during a time of the Depression when people were anxious about food and housing security." This is what and then it says a fireside chat. So some of that, it's piecing different things together. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? Yay. Thank y'all. We appreciate it. I think Brittany got a guide to everybody, right? Okay, perfect. We'd love to see y'all on Tuesdays.
If you don't have a session tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., because what else are you doing? Come see me talking about differentiation.
Oh, yeah.
Differentiation tomorrow.
All right. Bye, online. We love you too.